Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other girls in Millbrook. While they spent their evenings gossiping at the local diner or shopping for pretty dresses, Sarah could be found in her father's auto repair shop. Her hands covered in grease and her mind focused on fixing engines. At 22, she had become the best mechanic in town, but that didn't stop people from whispering behind her back. "She's too rough around the edges," the town ladies would say. "No man will ever want a girl who smells like motor oil and wears overalls." Sarah tried not to let their words hurt her, but deep down, she wondered if they were right. Maybe she wasn't feminine enough. Maybe she would never find someone who could love her just as she was. The worst of the gossips was Margaret Thornton, the mayor's wife. Margaret made it her business to know everyone else's business, and she never missed a chance to remind Sarah of her shortcomings. Poor dear, Margaret would sigh dramatically whenever Sarah walked by. If only she'd learned to act like a proper lady. She's getting older every year, and still no husband in sight. Sarah's best friend Emma often defended her. "Don't listen to them," Emma would say. "You're amazing just the way you are. The right person will see that." But as the months passed, and Sarah watched her friends get married one by one, she began to doubt herself more and more. The annual Harvest Festival was approaching, and as usual, it was the biggest social event of the year. Everyone in Millbrook would be there, dressed in their finest clothes, showing off for potential romantic interests. Sarah dreaded it. She knew she'd spend the evening watching from the sidelines while Margaret and her friends pointed and whispered about the poor girl who couldn't catch a man. 3 days before the festival, a stranger rode into town. His name was Jake Coleman, and he was unlike anyone Millbrook had ever seen. He wore a simple black hat and well-worn jeans, and he rode a beautiful horse that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Jake was quiet and polite, speaking only when spoken to, but there was something about his calm confidence that caught everyone's attention. Jake had come to Millbrook to buy supplies for his ranch, which was located about 50 miles outside of town. He planned to stay for a week to take care of business and let his horse rest. He rented a room above the general store and went about his business quietly, drawing curious stares wherever he went. On his second day in town, Jake's truck broke down right in front of Sarah's shop. Sarah was working on another car when she heard the engine sputtering and dying. She looked up to see the handsome stranger getting out of his vehicle, looking frustrated but not angry. "Excuse me, miss," Jake said politely, tipping his hat. "I'm having some trouble with my truck. Would you be able to take a look at it?" Sarah wiped her hands on her overalls and nodded. "Of course. Let me see what's wrong." She popped the hood and immediately spotted the problem. "Your alternator belt is broken. I can fix it, but I'll need to order a new belt. It should be here by tomorrow afternoon." Jake smiled, and Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm Jake Coleman, by the way." "Sarah Martinez," she replied, suddenly very aware of the grease under her fingernails and the oil stain on her shirt. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah. I have to say, it's impressive to see someone who knows their way around an engine like you do." Sarah blushed. She wasn't used to compliments about her work, especially not from handsome strangers. "Thank you. Most people think it's strange for a girl to be a mechanic." Jake's expression grew serious. "Well, most people are fools then. Honest work is honest work, regardless of who's doing it. And good work is even rarer. I can tell just by watching you that you know what you're doing." For the rest of the afternoon, Jake sat in Sarah's shop, asking thoughtful questions about her work and listening intently to her answers. He seemed genuinely interested in learning about engines and impressed by her knowledge. Sarah found herself relaxing and opening up in a way she rarely did with strangers. When closing time came, Jake thanked her again and promised to return the next day for his truck. As he walked away, Sarah caught sight of Margaret Thornton watching from across the street, her eyes narrow with curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like jealousy. That evening at the diner, the whole town was buzzing with talk about the mysterious cowboy and his broken-down truck. Margaret held court at her usual table, speculating loudly about Jake's background and intentions. "Mark my words," Margaret declared, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "A man like that doesn't stay in a place like this. He'll be gone within the week, probably with some poor girl's heart in pieces." Sarah, sitting alone at the counter with her coffee, tried to ignore the comments, but she couldn't help wondering if Margaret was right. Men like Jake Coleman didn't usually stick around for girls like her. The next day, Jake returned to Sarah's shop as promised. Sarah had the new alternator belt ready and quickly set to work installing it. As she worked, Jake continued their conversation from the day before, asking about her life in Millbrook and sharing stories about his ranch. "I raise horses mainly," Jake explained. "It's quiet work, but I like it that way. Too much noise and commotion makes me nervous." He laughed softly. "I suppose that makes me sound boring." "Not at all," Sarah said, tightening the last bolt. "It sounds peaceful. I've always loved animals, but I've never had the chance to work with horses. Maybe you could visit sometime," Jake suggested, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, if you'd want to. I know you're probably too busy here." Sarah's heart fluttered. Was he asking her on a date? She tried to play it cool. "I might like that. When I get some free time." Before Jake could respond, Margaret Thornton burst through the shop door, followed by her daughter Linda and 2 other town ladies. They were all dressed in their finest day dresses and had obviously come to get a closer look at the stranger everyone was talking about. "Oh my goodness," Margaret exclaimed dramatically. "Mr. Coleman, isn't it? What a pleasant surprise to find you here." She shot a meaningful glance at Sarah, who was still bent over the truck engine. "I do hope our little mechanic girl is taking good care of you." Jake straightened up, his friendly expression cooling slightly. "Miss Martinez is an excellent mechanic, ma'am. The best I've encountered." Margaret laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on Sarah's nerves. "Oh, how sweet of you to say. Of course, Sarah does try her best, bless her heart, but surely a successful rancher like yourself is used to more refined service?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She kept her head down and continued working, wishing she could disappear. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," Jake said, his voice growing colder. "Well," Margaret continued, oblivious to his change in tone, "I just mean that a man of your obvious quality might prefer to do business with someone more appropriate. My husband owns the Ford dealership on Main Street. I'm sure he could recommend a proper mechanic for your automotive needs." Linda Thornton stepped forward, batting her eyelashes. "And if you need anything else while you're in town, Mr. Coleman, I'd be happy to show you around. I know all the best places to eat and shop." Sarah's hands tightened on her wrench. She had heard variations of this conversation her entire life, but it still stung every time. These women saw her as less than them, not worthy of respect or consideration. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah braced herself for his polite acceptance of their offer. Instead, his voice, when he spoke, was ice cold. "Ladies, I appreciate your concern, but Miss Martinez is exactly the kind of person I prefer to do business with. She's honest, skilled, and hard-working. Those are qualities I value highly." Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, well, of course. I just thought." "You thought wrong," Jake interrupted. "And I'll thank you not to speak disrespectfully about Miss Martinez in my presence again." The shop fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's wrench slipping and clattering to the floor. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. No one had ever defended her like that before. Margaret's face had turned red with embarrassment and anger. "Well, I never. Come along, girls. Clearly we're not welcome here." She swept out of the shop with her entourage trailing behind her, but not before shooting a venomous look at Sarah. After they left, Jake turned to Sarah with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry about that. I hope I didn't make things worse for you." Sarah stood up slowly, her heart pounding. "You didn't have to do that. They're right. You know, I'm not like other girls in this town." "No," Jake agreed quietly. "You're better." For the rest of the week, Jake found excuses to visit Sarah's shop. Sometimes he needed supplies that just happened to be near her business. Other times he claimed his truck was making a strange noise that Sarah could never find but dutifully checked for anyway. Sarah began to look forward to his visits, and she found herself taking extra care with her appearance, even putting on lipstick under her work clothes. The town gossips had plenty to say about Jake's frequent visits to the auto shop. Margaret Thornton was particularly vocal about her disapproval, telling anyone who would listen that it was inappropriate for a man of Jake's obvious breeding to be associating with that Martinez girl. "She's clearly thrown herself at him," Margaret would say. "It's embarrassing to watch. The poor man is probably just being polite." But those who actually observed Jake and Sarah together could see that wasn't the case. Jake's interest was genuine, and Sarah's responses were natural and unforced. They talked easily together, laughing at each other's jokes and sharing stories about their lives. On the evening before the Harvest Festival, Jake asked Sarah if she would be attending. "I usually work the festival," Sarah said, not meeting his eyes. "Someone needs to be available, in case there are any emergencies with the carnival equipment." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Emergency preparedness is important." He paused. "But surely you get some time off to enjoy the festivities?" Sarah shrugged. "I'm not much of a festival person. All that dressing up and socializing, it's not really my thing." What she didn't say was that she dreaded the festival because it always meant hours of watching other people have fun while she stood on the sidelines, the object of pitying glances and whispered comments about the poor girl who couldn't catch a man. The night of the Harvest Festival arrived with perfect autumn weather. The town square was decorated with golden lights and colorful banners, and the smell of caramel apples and funnel cake filled the air. Sarah had planned to stay home, but Emma convinced her to at least make an appearance. "You can't hide forever," Emma said firmly. "Besides, you look beautiful tonight." Sarah had reluctantly put on her one good dress, a simple blue one that brought out her eyes, and let Emma fix her hair. When they arrived at the festival, Sarah immediately regretted coming. Margaret Thornton was holding court near the bandstand, wearing an elaborate purple dress and enough jewelry to stock a small store. Linda and her friends were clustered nearby, all dressed to kill, and clearly on the hunt for male attention. "There's Jake," Emma whispered, nudging Sarah. Sure enough, the cowboy was standing near the edge of the crowd, looking uncomfortable in the press of people but devastatingly handsome in a clean white shirt and dark jeans. Sarah's heart sank when she saw Linda Thornton approaching him with a bright smile and a plate of cookies. She watched as Linda batted her eyelashes and offered Jake refreshments, clearly intent on monopolizing his attention. "I should go," Sarah murmured to Emma. This was a mistake. Before Emma could respond, Margaret Thornton's voice rose above the crowd noise. She was talking to a group of women near the punch bowl, but her voice was deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. "I just think it's sad," Margaret was saying. "That poor Coleman fellow is clearly too polite to discourage Sarah Martinez's advances. She's been practically throwing herself at him all week, and he's too much of a gentleman to tell her the truth." "What truth?" asked one of the other women. Margaret sighed dramatically. "That a successful rancher like him could never seriously consider someone like her. She's a nice enough girl, I suppose, but she's not wife material. Can you imagine? A man of his caliber ending up with a mechanic who smells like motor oil?" The women around Margaret murmured in agreement, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She had been fooling herself thinking that Jake might actually care about her. Margaret was right. Men like Jake Coleman didn't end up with girls like her. "She needs to accept her place," Margaret continued. "Some people are meant to be alone, and there's no shame in that. Sarah should focus on her work and stop embarrassing herself by chasing after men who are clearly out of her league." Sarah couldn't take any more. She turned to flee, but found her way blocked by Jake Coleman himself. He was standing right behind her, and from the expression on his face, he had heard every word Margaret had said. "Excuse me," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume. The crowd around them began to fall silent, sensing drama. Margaret looked up with a bright smile that faltered when she saw Jake's cold expression. "Oh, Mr. Coleman, I didn't see you there. Are you enjoying the festival?" "Not particularly," Jake replied. His eyes swept the crowd, taking in all the curious faces. "I've been listening to some very interesting conversation. Mrs. Thornton, you seem to have a lot of opinions about my personal business." Margaret's face flushed. We were just chatting. You know how women talk." "Yes, I do," Jake said. "I also know when someone is speaking out of ignorance and malice." He stepped closer to Sarah, who was frozen with mortification. The entire festival crowd had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. "Sarah Martinez," Jake said clearly, "is the finest woman I've ever had the privilege to know. She's honest, hardworking, skilled, and kind. Any man would be lucky to have her interest." Margaret sputtered. "But surely you can't be serious about—" "I'm completely serious," Jake interrupted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "In fact, I was planning to ask Sarah a very important question tonight." The crowd gasped as Jake opened the box, revealing a beautiful silver ring set with a simple but elegant diamond. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Sarah," Jake said, dropping to one knee right there in front of everyone. "I know we haven't known each other very long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're everything I've ever wanted in a partner and more. Will you marry me?" The festival grounds were completely silent, except for the distant sound of carnival music. Sarah stared down at Jake, hardly able to believe this was really happening. But I'm just a mechanic," she whispered. "You're not just anything," Jake said firmly. "You're Sarah Martinez. And I love you exactly as you are." Tears streaming down her face, Sarah nodded. "Yes," she said quietly, then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as Jake slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger and stood to kiss her. Emma was crying and hugging anyone within reach. Even some of the women who had been gossiping earlier were smiling and clapping. Margaret Thornton, however, looked as if she had swallowed something extremely unpleasant. "Well," she huffed to her daughter, "I suppose some people have no standards." Jake heard her comment and turned to face her one last time. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Thornton. Some people have no standards at all." His meaning was crystal clear, and Margaret's face turned an interesting shade of purple. As the festival continued around them, Jake and Sarah stood together, her hand clasped in his, watching the celebration they had inadvertently created. Sarah couldn't stop staring at her ring, not because it was expensive, though the silver gleamed beautifully in the festival lights, but because it represented something she had never dared to hope for, someone who loved and valued her exactly as she was. "No more doubts," Jake murmured in her ear. "You're perfect just the way you are. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget that." From that night forward, Margaret Thornton and her friends found other topics for their gossip, and Sarah Martinez never again questioned her worth, because she had found someone who saw her true value and was willing to proclaim it to the world.